everyone, me again. Contextual studies for a change. So we're on week 21 this week, last week before half term. We're going to work on a mini project again, just as we have for the last few weeks. So we focused on ready-mades and then we had a look at value last week. This week we're going to have a look at conflict and war, and it's going to be split into two parts. This week we're going to look at understanding an artist's piece of work, what the context is, why they might have produced it in the way that they did, some of the different techniques that they've used, some of the formal elements that they've applied to their work. So you're going to get a real understanding of how they've explored conflict. We're then going to think about the impact of that and how maybe we need to reflect on whether an artist can actually report on a conflict if they weren't there. And so you're going to produce your own piece of practical work to support the work that we've done this week. So it'll be in two parts, both will be submitted separately, and these will build into that massive bank of evidence that we've been creating over the past few weeks, because since September you've all worked really hard in this unit. You learned about context, we learned about formal elements, we analysed art, we've compared artists, we've looked at different themes that artists work in, and we've done so much work and you've really built a massive understanding. We need to make sure that we're proving that and showing it. And so these mini projects, each one is banking a piece of evidence that we can use, because the future is still unknown. We don't know what's going to happen come June when you need to finish the course. We don't know whether the exams might still go ahead in summer or whether they're going to be asking for evidence of the kind of grade that you'd be aiming for. And so we're really getting our ducks in a row by doing this and giving ourselves the strongest opportunity to show all of those beautiful, massive skills that we've learned, because you've done so much. So let's get into it. So last week we looked at value. You produced a piece of written work where you were talking about intrinsic value and perceived value, and you were looking at the Tom Dixon Great Chair Grab. This week we're going to focus on a different mini theme. We're going to look at conflict and how one particular artist has explored that. So we're going to have a look at Picasso's Guernica, and you're going to need to produce a template to work in today. So in the orange box on the screen, you need to produce a PowerPoint document so that you can do a slide for each of the mini written tasks, and then you'll submit that today. When we come back from half term, we'll still be working kind of around the Guernica, but you'll be producing your own work, and so that'll need to go on a separate slide that you'll submit on that week's work. So set up your document, pause this video if you need to. I'm also going to post this PowerPoint into our chat so that you can copy any of the links that you need. So step one, there's a video that introduces the painting and the context, what the painting represents, what it's about, what was happening, so that you've got some background knowledge to try and understand the painting a bit better. So it's a super simple introduction to the painting. If you can click on that link and have a watch. Hopefully you'll understand what was going on, what the conflict is that Picasso was painting. Here's the painting as a large scale copy, and it's got the caption at the bottom there, so you've got all the details that you need. Each of the slides is asking you to analyse a different aspect of the image, and I've put all of the tasks in green at the bottom. So the first one is a colour analysis, so you need to look at what we can see. So we're going to use what we learnt in the film, but it's mostly about what we can see to analyse how Picasso has used colour and texture. So what artistic choices has he made in his colour palette and why? So the main one is, where's all the colour? The second thing is, what effect do you think that texture gives? So have a look at the different types of textures that he's got in there. Don't just look at this horse in the centre. There's lots of texture in there. Have a think about why you think he did that based on the context. You need to write your answers on your first PowerPoint slide, and the heading at the top of that PowerPoint slide needs to be Guernica colour analysis. Second task is to look at composition. So we need to think about, is there a focal point of this composition? Think about how the image has been put together and maybe why. The second thing is, what words would you use to describe the composition? And does it suit the theme or subject matter of the painting? So the way you describe the painting, does that mirror what the painting is about in some way? Chaotic, for example, overwhelming, busy. You need to write your answers to this on a second PowerPoint slide, and the heading needs to be Guernica composition analysis. Third thing is to look at representation. So I've got two images on here, the Guernica painting for you to refer to, and this is a newspaper photograph in the aftermath of the Guernica conflict. And so after the bombs have been dropped, it has some images of death, it has images of destruction, This is the real life, what it was like, what Picasso was drawing on to make his piece of work. So, the bullet point questions that we need to answer are: do you think Picasso's painting accurately represents this event? So, seeing, not obviously you're not seeing the whole event, but you're seeing some of the aftermath of that, which is what Picasso saw. Do we think that that represents the event? Why? Why not? You don't have to think it does, but tell me why. Give me reasons. Justify what you think. Does it leave anything out? So, do you think that Picasso's image is a softer representation? Do you think that it's harsher? Do you think that it's more about feelings than physical devastation? What do you think that he's trying to get across? The next thing is: what aspects of Cubism have been used to depict figures and animals? So remember, Picasso was one of the creators, along with Georges Braque, of Cubism. So we looked at Cubism in week 5, and the PowerPoint is still on Moodle if you want a little recap of the elements of Cubism. I want you to think about what aspects of Cubism have been used to depict the figures and animals, and how have they worked? Has it been successful? Was this a really good way to represent conflict by using Cubism? Hint, it's fragmented. So, is that a really good way to do that? The third thing is: what words would you use to describe the representation of figures? So, this is thinking about how the actual objects have been rendered, how have they been put on the page, what kind of emotions does it put across, what physically does it look like. So, you need to write your answers to the third PowerPoint slide as Guernica representation. Task 4, in the last task on our slide, is to look at the impact of Guernica. So there's some context here that you need to read before you start, which tells you about the lasting impact that Guernica had on the world stage. So this is a picture of there was a tapestry made of the painting, and it hangs in the United Nations. So if you read that context so that you understand how it's been used throughout time since it was made in 1937, and then you've got some questions to answer. So this is on our fourth PowerPoint slide called Guernica Impact. You need to say: how effective is the image in terms of criticising war? Does it celebrate war? Does it say that we shouldn't really be having war? Is it a negative or positive view on war? What is Picasso trying to say through this image? Is it a warning? What is it? You need to list all of the emblems and symbols and motifs that you can identify in the image which relate to some of these emotions and feelings about war. So things like loss, anguish, war itself, defeat, death, destruction, and hope. So these are all key elements that we associate with conflict, and things that perhaps happen after a conflict has been held. So what parts of those things are represented in Guernica? And you might want to go back to one of your large scale images to have a proper look at that. So think about the symbols, think about the motifs, think about, are each of those elements represented, or is it, when you've done that, is it that you find that it's more of the destruction and anguish that is represented, but maybe loss isn't? Is there any hope in the image, or is it all quite negative? So we're trying to look at all of the elements to form a conclusion, to say, what has Picasso done? Has he missed some bits out? What is the impact when we look at this now, 70, 80, 90, 100 years later? What does it still say to us about war? Is that still relevant? Okay, so just streaming my screen down there, zoom it back out again. So after we've done that, you need to send me your work. So you need to save your PowerPoint, make sure your name is on it, and you're going to upload it to the assignment section on Teams. Our title this week is Guernica Written Work, and your Group B, just in case you need reminding. So the assignment tab is the same place that it always has been. There are just new assignments added there. I've also marked your work and sent it back to you so that you can review my comments, and I'll do the same with this. Next week we'll move on to doing a practical task, so there isn't any written element after half term. It's based on Guernica, but you're being asked to do something slightly different and create a practical piece of work to explore a question about art history. Can we, as an artist, really represent something if we weren't there, if we weren't an eyewitness? And that's the question that we're going to be answering by producing our own piece of work, using some media that Picasso used to create his piece of work. So he worked from newspapers, film reels, archive footage, and so that was how he learnt about Guernica and produced this work. You're going to do the same thing. Okay?